You are listening to the Therapists in the Hot Seat podcast with your hosts, Tom Coates and Tom Holland-Pearse.
Hello and welcome to the Therapists in the Hot Seat podcast. This is the podcast where we aim to talk about all things mental health and to demystify therapy in any which way we can, whilst also having a little bit of fun along the way. My name is Tom Coates, and as always, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Tom Holland-Pearse. Would you like to say hi, Tom?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Series 2.
Yes, welcome to Series 2. So I will say a bit more about that in a moment, but you may have seen, if you're watching the podcast, that we're also joined by the amazing Shelley Bradley-Scholey? Got that wrong already. Shelley, who is one, thankfully, I should have checked that out beforehand. There you go. Another one for the bloopers reel. Yeah. Who is joining us to talk about military and veteran mental health. And we're going to talk a bit more about why that's an important topic in a moment. But welcome back to season 2. We've had a little bit of time off. Lots of things have been happening, which I'm sure Tom will tell you about in his check-in as well. We've been doing things podcast side and personal side. So we're coming back hopefully with a full agenda for the next season. We've got some wonderful topics lined up, including people-pleasing, burnout, managing burnout, improving our sleep, how we can use nutrition to improve our mental health, managing public speaking, and thinking about our nervous system and particularly our polyvagal approaches to therapy as well. So lots coming up, hopefully, for you over the next season to look forward to. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe to our Instagrams and YouTubes. And please do get over and have a look at our website if you haven't already. We'll put the link in the show notes. And that's where you can get in touch with us, become a part of the community, send us notes, messages, whatever you like. And you can even buy us a coffee if you want to. So if you think, gosh, these guys are really smashing it, especially with their intros to podcasts, and we deserve a coffee, then please do. And we'd be very grateful for that. And we'll drink that during our next recording.
Or spend it on beer. It's one or the other, really.
Yeah. Tom not meant to mention what we do. Okay. So today in this episode 1 of season 2, we're discussing military and veteran mental health with Shelley Bradley-Scholey. And Shelley is a therapist. She specializes in trauma. So she's a trauma specialist, but she's also an author, a speaker, and a military veteran herself, and served in the Navy. So thank you so much for coming along, Shelley, and we look forward to hearing a bit more about that soon as well.
Thanks for having me, guys.
You're very, very welcome. And from our conversations as well, I'm sort of noticing from the research I've done just how important this topic is, actually. And just to give our listeners an idea of this, because you might not necessarily be aware, or you may be, on average, 17 US military veterans die by suicide every day.
Wow.
Yeah, that's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in the UK, veterans under 25 are up to 3 times more likely to die by suicide than civilians. So moving away from the morbid area of suicide, about 1 in 5 veterans experience PTSD, depression, or anxiety after leaving the armed forces. And rates of PTSD among combat veterans are estimated at 11 to 20%, depending on their era of service. So just showing here that, there's really high prevalence of these conditions. And we also know that individuals who have been in the military might be less likely to seek help as well. So on average, veterans will wait 4 years before seeking support, which is a long time. Shelley, I'm sure you'll agree. As we know that the sooner we can get in, the sooner we can treat, the better in any condition, but particularly with this. So something that's coming up here that we need to be aware of, and how we think one of our aims for today is to think about how we can support this population and help them access therapy as well. Okay, before we get stuck into that though, remember our podcast follows a CBT therapy structure. So we're going to start with our check-in, move through to our main topic, and then finish up with some homework setting as well. So, Tom, we'll do our check-in if that's okay. How are you doing?
Well, I've been doing absolutely fine, but just this moment, I just had a little pang of anxiety, and I think it's in relation to those stats, whereby it's inherently interesting to talk about veterans' mental health for a magnitude of reasons, but you hear those stats, and it's like, oh God, it's more serious than I had sort of been aware of, if you know what I mean, in terms of obviously the suicide rates, the 4-year wait, the rates in which people have PTSD, and I'm sure there's a cacophony of other things as well. So it's just sort of hammered home to me, like, why we need to do this podcast and why we're so grateful, Shelley, for having you on as well. I think this will be a really valuable tool, hopefully, for people, and very, very interesting for us as well. So pang of anxiety. But apart from that, I've been pretty good. Yeah, I've got married in the last month, which has been really exciting. Bit of a whirlwind.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, my head sort of hasn't been in the mental health domain for some time, it feels like. So, now it's nice to be back though. Yeah, and that's it. Apart from that, honestly, we're just ticking on. I've had a rejig of my office, as the eagle-eyed viewer may observe. But
It looks nice. It looks like,
yeah,
what does that say behind you there on the wall?
this
Yeah.
this is my hope picture. And the reason I changed my camera around is because I wasn't getting the value for the money. You know, my clients weren't seeing it, so I was like, I need to sort of squeeze every little drop out of that. So yeah, we've got that going on as well.
Very good. Very good.
How have you been, Tom?
Yes, yeah, very busy. I've also just moved offices as well, so I'm renting another place in Henley that has no art on the walls at the moment. It's very, very bare, and so it looks quite clinical. So I'm looking forward to getting all that sorted. And my obsessive personality needs that done yesterday. So I'm trying to juggle family and clients and moving offices and birthday parties and all that kind of thing. So yeah. A lot going on. I'm feeling a little bit nervous about today. I said the same to Shelley before this, that I feel quite rusty, and I think that's probably come across in the intro. So as soon as the intro is done, my life gets a lot easier in these podcasts, so I could relax now. But it's definitely a bit of a build-up of anxiety beforehand. But otherwise, all good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Shelley, how are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good, you know. Busy, as you guys. Find me a therapist who isn't busy, right? And yeah, just juggling mum life, dog mum life, work life, wife life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It is. I kind of like to be busy. I'm one of those people where if I'm still for too long, I start to get a bit nervous, you know. So I do like to kind of have different things to just pour myself into.
So what am I missing? What's going on here? Why is it so quiet?
Oh, yeah.
My toxic trait to myself is I'm like obsessive with to-do lists. I cannot stand being behind on things. I'm always trying to get to the top, and that's like what I do. And as soon as I get to the top, I just feel like, oh, what's the point of all this? I feel so unfulfilled. This can't be the best strategy for my life, surely.
Yeah. One of my therapists once told me that I strive for relaxation. And that's a similar thing. So
that's
yeah.
good.
Yeah. So what that means is that I have to get all my jobs done immediately. That's that obsessive brain I was telling you about. Like if it's Sunday morning, if we need to go to the shop, I'm the guy waiting there at 10 a.m. for trading hours to open so they can pay for it and get out of there. So yeah, but I agree, Tom, it doesn't really feel fulfilling because as soon as that's done, something else pops up, doesn't it? And then
yeah, absolutely.
Never ending, especially when, like Shelley is saying, children, dogs, family, clients, so much going on.
Yeah.
Good. Great. Well, look, as I said before, I know I'm repeating myself, but thank you so much for coming on, Shelley, and for joining us and for bringing your experience, your story, and your expertise. And hopefully this will reach out to a lot of people and increase their knowledge and awareness, but also it might, touch a few veterans who might be thinking that perhaps we could do with a bit of support as well. So really appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
We wondered if we could start the podcast by hearing a bit about your story, if that's okay. Because I'm not sure how many therapists there are out there who have also served in the armed forces. I think that must give you a really wonderful sort of view of things and insight into that life and, what people experience after that life. So would you mind telling us a little bit about what pulled you into the military and what kind of things you noticed and then what perhaps led you to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I joined the military in my early 20s. I was already a trained mental health nurse. So I joined as a nurse. Sometimes the military train their own nurses, but I was what they called a direct entry. So I'd already been trained, I'd already worked as a nurse. And so I went and did my basic training, which was a whole thing. I don't know if I fully understood quite what I was getting myself into, if I'm honest. But I joined around the time that the conflict in Iraq was really at its height. So there were a lot of British forces out there, and the conflict in Afghanistan was beginning to kind of bubble up and escalate. So the reason I joined is because I really wanted to be supporting the people that were going out to do the roles out in those countries. It was in the press a lot, there's a lot of focus on that. And I just thought, gosh, these people, that must be really tough for them. Like, I really want to go and do something completely different, make a difference in that area. So off I went.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
What were people saying around you? Were they encouraging that? What was happening?
Well, so I was kind of renowned really for being like quite a girly girl.
Okay.
So, I mean, I went to that job from a pretty tough area. So I worked in forensic mental health in an inpatient setting, a medium secure unit. So that was a pretty tough and quite a male dominated environment. But nevertheless, people were a bit like, is she really going to do that? Like, she'll be, people thought I'd be back within a few weeks, that I probably wouldn't really like it. It wasn't my cup of tea. I was just really determined, and there was a whole process to go through of tests to join, medical tests, academic tests, fitness tests. And each time I went through one of those steps, I could feel my appetite to join get stronger and stronger,
Wow.
But kind of got to a point where I was like I can't fail at this. I need to get there. I need to be doing this.
Mm.
Where did the sort of compassion come from for you to sign up to the forces and to take that role? Because it's a hell of a role to take, I'd imagine, So where did that drive, motivation come from?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So a lot of people in the armed forces have family that have served. I didn't. Nor did I live in an area that was a particularly populated area by the armed forces. I had no military connection whatsoever, in fact. But I just felt really moved by what I was seeing on the news, and what I was seeing people experience out there. I think I've always been drawn to the trauma component of mental health. I've always wondered what happened to people for them to end up where they do. And I just felt really pulled to perhaps do something that felt bigger than me, that felt bigger than my little bubble that I was living in. And that I think I probably also felt drawn to do something that was completely out of my comfort zone, like to do the stuff to do the hard stuff that people thought, she's not allowed to do that. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go and do it then.
Yeah.
Good for you. Defying the expectations of others almost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gosh. Yeah, I think, when I look at war, I think of it as so abnormal. When you think about our society, I can't imagine it. You see it in films, in documentaries, and that the actual hardship of what must be going on in various war zones around the world right now, and living through that must have been terrible. So I can really sort of feel that idea of I want to get out there, I want to kind of support and help where I can.
Yeah, and I think so. I would say on the whole, I don't support conflict. I very much at this point in my life don't see that having ever been the solution to very much, actually. And I was really drawn to kind of being able to be something supportive and humane within
Nice.
a situation that was very inhumane. I think it's really hard to understand the reality of what conflict's like unless you've been in that situation. but being able to be something softer in that, I think was like a real pull for me.
So were you stationed somewhere during those conflicts?
Yeah, so usually how it works is most people have their specific role that they're employed within, and they generally are based somewhere within the UK. That's like their main base. And then most people undertake various deployments during the course of their career. Um, so because I was in the Navy, I spent a lot of my time on the South Coast, down in the West Country, and here in Hampshire and Dorset areas. And within that, then we would kind of get lifted out of our day job, as it were, which was still working in military establishments. And then we would get loaned to particular units that would be going abroad on deployments. So there's usually like a rotation of different units in and out of conflict zones. So one unit will go out there for a certain period of time, they'll move back out, and another unit will come in. And each time that happens, the supporting forces, the logistics, the healthcare, the mental health care, they kind of move in and out with them.
Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. So it's kind of I mean, I knew about tours and things like that and the deployments, but I didn't realize that there was a rotation of the logistic and support staff as well. That makes a lot of sense. But Shelley, it sounds like you were drawn to the people aspect side of this, the helping the people, helping. This is an abnormal situation that I do not support. I don't think it's getting us anywhere in resolving things, yet these people are experiencing it. So here you are to try and help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that and I guess this fits with the trauma piece. Like, it's the human suffering, isn't it? You know, so within any conflict, there is human beings who suffer on both sides, but also the people who are just caught in the crossfire of that. And that's the bit that I feel pulled to. And I also think that sometimes when people join the armed forces, they don't necessarily fully understand quite what they're going to be exposed to, and they don't understand how that might impact them. A lot of people join at a really, really young age. My husband joined the army when he was 16.
Ah.
You know, like, I'm not sure that a 16-year-old necessarily understands the gravity of what they're stepping into. So therefore, when these people are then suffering because of what they've done and what they've been exposed to, I think that they are so, they're so in need of good evidence-based, solid mental health care to kind of help, undo the damage that's been done to them by the situations they've been in.
Yeah, because 16, as we know as therapists, you're not really sort of fully baked until you're about 25, are you? Like prefrontal cortex wise.
Exactly, yeah.
So a 16-year-old is highly vulnerable and kind of malleable, like vulnerable, susceptible, something like that to whatever's going on in their life. And usually it's kind of interpersonal relationships at school or thinking about university, but to be in whatever a 16-year-old in the forces is up against is, as Tom said earlier, pretty strange and abnormal compared to the rest of the population. It's a very specific career path, very unique challenges involved with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the process of joining the armed forces has a really significant impact upon people. So it's not just the trauma people see in conflict, it's this entire process by which they are, that they're away from their family unit. They kind of go through a training process in which they internalize a whole other set of values and standards. And this organization is so much more than a job. It becomes part of people's identity. Yeah, it's huge.
Gosh, I was just reflecting on that actually, and the 16 element, and like Tom's touching upon there, that we know now through more recent work with Sarah Jane Blakemore that the human brain is not fully developed till we're 25. And some of those later stages of development include impulse control, rational decision making, and you know, those kind of, for one, I know I've said it already, but impulsive kind of elements. And if you're thinking I'm a 16, 17, 18-year-old and in a war zone having to make a decision on the split, you know, and that's a lot of responsibility to put on somebody, you know. But I'm also reflecting on the process there. I mean, I've only ever seen that in movies, right? This idea of breaking somebody down to build them back up again. And I don't know if that's true or not. Is that something that actually happens?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is true. And I think until I left the service myself and then began to get a reasonable bit of distance from that part of my life, it was only then that I realized that, yes, I had been molded, that I had changed fundamentally who I was. You know, there was a version of me that existed in the armed forces. And I didn't recognize that as something that had happened as part of that system until I was pretty far out the other side of it and had begun to reintegrate back into, you know, the civilian community, as it were. And I began to notice differences about how I approached the world, how I thought, how I talked, my expectations. You know, there were lots of differences. And I think it's essential, really, that people go through that process because of the things you're saying, Tom. When you're in a high stakes, high risk situation, you need an ability to function at a really high level, you know? And I think we have to overcome a lot of our normal habits and responses in order to be able to do that, you know? So, like most people, would run away from a dangerous situation.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's just normal, right? It was only when I did my CBT training. I was still in the armed forces when I trained to be a CBT therapist, and we did an exercise, and our lecturer described a really traumatic situation, and said, so put your hand up if you would go towards that vehicle. And I was like, oh yeah. And I looked around, and genuinely, I was the only person in the room that had my hand up. I could not believe that everyone else was like, well, no, I would phone an ambulance, or I would go and get help, or I would do this. And the lecturer actually worked with military veterans. And they said, you know, that's a typical assumption that people run towards the danger, when in fact, no, that's not normal.
I mean, I get nervous when I go paintballing. So to put that into context, it's interesting though, because I think it's such an, like, it's probably another episode, you know, it's so much to say, but to that notion of breaking someone down to build them back up as a necessary step, because they have to override their primal whims in order to stay focused and effective in whatever it is they're up against. So we can't say it's not like a bad thing. It's just a necessary thing. I suppose I'd be really curious though. Does that, because I suppose you don't lose that in civilian life, and does it still serve you in civilian life, or does it ever hold you back or trip you up in any way?
I think it gets in the way of people reintegrating effectively. So if my expectation is that everybody has the exact same values as me, which is what it's like in the military. So when you join, you get these core values drilled into you: courage, respect, loyalty, integrity, discipline. That it forms the framework of who you are. When I encounter people who don't uphold those values, it's really challenging and disappointing. But actually, again, you know, it's not usual for people to have that drilled into them. The idea that the mission comes before everything, the organization comes before everything, and that's how it is in the military. It has to be that way because it can be quite a sacrificial role. You know, people often leave friends, family, loved ones, they miss important events. When you go into a civilian workplace with that kind of idea, and naturally that's not usual, people don't put the mission and the job before everything else, that can lead to a bit of imbalance, a bit of confusion. And I think whilst we enter into the armed forces, we adopt these ways of being. When we leave, we need to try to park some of these ways of being so that we can just function in the civilian world.
It's so interesting, isn't it? That is so different to the way the civilian world works. And I had shivers going down my spine as you were talking there, Shelley, because I was thinking about, the mission comes first to the sacrifice of potentially human life, right? And there's none, right? There's no companies into the civilian world, unless they're like private military, I don't know, that would have that kind of thing. It's like, the work is on the backseat, well-being comes first, especially recently in recent years. So that idea that, somebody would, I don't know, call in sick or wouldn't pick up that piece of work when their colleague is struggling might really irk somebody who's coming from that military background, and they can't understand that and can't really empathize with that unless they're being a bit more flexible, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to relearn that stuff. It was only when after I left the armed forces, I went to work in a trauma service in the south of England that is renowned for its compassion-focused approaches. And I was taking some leave, so I put my out of office on, and my out of office said, "Dear whoever, I'm currently on leave. When I get back, I'm going to be deleting these emails. So if it's important, you need to email me again." And then off I went, and it was like really blunt. And my manager was like, "Shelley, you need to talk about your out of office. Like, you can't say that. You can't speak like that. Like, it's too blunt. You can't tell people you're going to delete their emails. Like, it just really lacks compassion." And I was like, okay. So she helped me rewrite this email, and it was about 3 paragraphs long, this out of office thing. I was like, oh my goodness, why are we using like 300 words when I could just say this in 20? And that was one of the points where I thought, oh my goodness, like I have absolutely been institutionalized by the military, because that blunt, direct, get to the point, this is how it is approach was just so ingrained in me. And I didn't think twice when I put that on my NHS out of office until my manager was like, oh dear.
Is there ever a sense of like eye rolling when you've got to go with this sort of civilian, almost like quite British, non-direct route? Does it feel a bit like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think probably less so now, because I've developed the ability to recognize that actually this isn't a life and death situation, that everybody else is the way they are for their own reasons. But I think there's definitely been points where I thought, really, come on now. When I got back from Afghanistan, someone in my office was really upset. So in the UK, I was a manager in a military mental health team, and my role on deployment was very much kind of clinical, out on the ground, doing the stuff. And when I came back in my first week, someone approached me in my office, and they were upset because someone else had been using their milk repeatedly.
And we call that milk gate.
Right. Okay. So it's a thing.
Big issue. Big issue.
Every office I've ever worked in, that people put they get a Sharpie and put a thing, and then they put a date so they can work out.
Oh my goodness.
These are the real issues, Shelley. This is what we really need to be focusing on.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it was really important to my colleague. My colleague was a civilian person working in our team with us. And yeah, they wanted me to do something about it. And I was just appalled, like genuinely in that moment, I was appalled. I was like, I cannot compute how this is causing such an issue. Like, nobody died. Everyone's got all their limbs. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, go away, get out of my office kind of thing. And I think that, like, the stark difference between what's important on operations in a war zone versus what's important when we're back in the real world in the West, it was just so stark, and I think I was so fresh off the back of having been out there that I just hadn't hadn't readjusted, and I didn't really have the I don't think I had the compassion really to be able to generate an empathetic response to the milk situation. Just,
Because
it just wasn't there.
it's really interesting because like when I hear you speak and you listed out some of those core values that you get through being in the forces, I can see there's a lot of it's quite easy to side with that in my mind to think, yeah, that makes sense. Even in civilian life, I could see that would be useful and that might be good. I suppose did it ever detract from a quality of life in civilian life that you would have wanted to have had, e.g., not developing compassion for things that might seem a bit menial? Was there any other wider issues you faced with that?
So I left the armed forces for a multitude of reasons. One of the reasons was because I wasn't able to prioritize my family.
Ah, interesting.
It
That's
was
interesting.
frowned upon. And I probably wouldn't have said that at the time because it would have felt quite disloyal of me to say that.
Wow.
But the reality is, it was frowned upon for me to prioritize my sick child or my husband just wanting me to be around. It was important to always be available and ready to go and do the thing. So it meant compromising in other areas of life. And very quickly after having children, I realized that I wasn't able to do that. And that's not a criticism of people who are able to make that juggle. But for me, I felt very compromised. I felt I couldn't do either of those things at my best. I couldn't be a service person at my best anymore. I couldn't be a mother at my best because I was constantly conflicted between those two different poles.
That's so interesting. So on one hand, those values are like excellent. You absolutely must adopt them in order to function in the services. But if your calling is changing, you got children or a husband or whatever you've got going on, many other things as well, and there's a bit of a battle you're going through there in that respect. Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult tug of war, isn't it? And it must have been so tough to detach from that, because in one way you are so integrated and a part of it, and thinking, yes, we are one. We have shared views. We are. I am accepted here, and yet I also need to think about my wider values of family and partners and well-being and all those kind of things. So I suppose I'm wondering, Shelley, at what point did you think, okay, I've been nursing here, I've been on the ground in Afghanistan, looking after people, sorting people out. At what point did you think, actually, I want to go more towards the therapy side of it? Because you say you started training when you were still in the forces.
Yeah. So it was quite soon after joining, actually, that I trained in my first modality, which was EMDR. There were several therapists, military therapists in our team who really advocated strongly for that approach. And it was a really great approach for that population. And it's really portable as well. So we could kind of take that skill out with us onto the ground wherever we went. And then it was after a trip to Afghanistan, I enrolled on CBT training. And it was just really, a lot of the work we were doing was one-to-one supportive work. And it was just really clear to me that some of the issues that we were working with needed more. Some things resolved, with kind of basic mental health support, kind of active listening, being able to help people kind of get routines back and help them sleep and all that stuff like that would help.
But that mental health first aid kit kind of thing, that first thing.
Yeah. But there was also a portion of people who that wasn't enough. And the military population is like any population. We see like a range of different mental health problems.
Yeah.
But often the stuff that really stuck around for me that I noticed was the trauma stuff. That just didn't get better on its own. It just, no matter what somebody did in terms of lifestyle adjustments and, paying attention to their well-being, that would be stuff that's very much stuck in the system. So even when I went to do my CBT training initially, from the get-go, really, I had an interest in trauma specifically. And I was really fortunate because I had a couple of amazing supervisors on my course who really helped me to learn about that, to understand trauma even beyond PTSD, to kind of work with the fallout of that. And yeah, that's amazing because I actually work with one of those people now on a course, and like, you know, to be able to kind of take everything that they taught me, like use that over the years, and now full circle be teaching other therapists how to use those same approaches is really cool.
Have there been, so I know you were explaining to me before we started this that your practice is trauma focused, but that's not necessarily veterans, it's a sort of global trauma, let's say. Is there any barriers you found with veterans specifically to accessing a service like yourself?
Yeah, I think there's lots of cultural challenges, really. So along with these values and this kind of way of thinking and being, there are also cultural perspectives on mental health, help seeking, and there's lots of active work to try and change those things. But, you know, cultural change takes a really long time, doesn't it? And, you know, attitudes and beliefs tend to persist. So I think there are cultural barriers for people getting the help that they need.
Can I just check, Shelley, because that fits with that stat, right, about it taking around 4 years for somebody to ask for help. And another stat that I didn't share is that 50% won't. So 50% are just sat there not doing that. So it makes sense that if there is that cultural aspect that you shouldn't ask for help. But I'm just wondering specifically, because that would help me as a therapist if I've got somebody who's kind of on the line about coming in for therapy. What is it specifically that people are thinking about asking for help? Is it that I might be weaker, that I'm a burden? What are people thinking?
Yeah, I think so. There is some research. So there's the Academic Centre for Defence Mental Health Research, which is based out of KCL in London. And they've done a lot of research looking at this particular area around stigma and barriers. And some of the beliefs that exist are exactly that, you know, I'm weak, I should be able to cope, I shouldn't ask for help, that it's shameful to ask for help. I think there's other barriers as well. I think that sometimes veterans feel like people don't understand and couldn't understand, that they don't get it. I think through the military culture, there is a sort of them and us mentality sometimes. So civilians are civvies, and there are views that civvies just don't get it. I think that can be a barrier as well sometimes for people.
Do you think there's an element of truth in that as well? Sorry, Tom, I interrupted.
I guess there is, in that, you know, there's a language around it. There's lots of acronyms and things like that people might not necessarily understand immediately. I think there is value in understanding the cultural specifics of this client group and making an effort to understand the culture in which they've existed and also the conflicts in which they've worked, because every conflict is different. I don't think you have to have been there to understand it. Like, I haven't experienced every single thing that my clients have experienced, but I'm still able to work with it because I've got an in-depth enough understanding of trauma to be able to do that.
I think...
sorry,
go ahead. I'll let you finish. Sorry,
I was just going to say, some veterans do want to see someone who they know has been there and gets it. Others absolutely do not want that. They don't want to speak to anybody who's ever had anything to do with the armed forces ever. So, you know, it's kind of quite dichotomous in that sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I was just going to come in and say, you know, I've worked with a few veterans who have said to me, you know, unless you've smelt that smell, unless you've had a bullet whistle past you, you can't possibly get it. And I was very grateful to one person in particular. He tried to describe it to me. You know, he was like, it smells like this, or it sounds like that. And that sort of helped me get alongside. But there's also something about breaking down that barrier between civilians and the military, and saying, I've not been there. I haven't been shot at. But I know enough about why that smell would do this to you. And I know enough about how that could have felt. Or, you know, I've lost friends who were in the Royal Marines, who I won't speak about because I don't want to disrespect the family. I haven't asked for their permission to do so. But I know that, you know, what they kind of, their experience was. So there's ways in which we can get alongside, but it's certainly not as authentic perhaps as some people would like.
Yeah. The thing is, it's just, I guess with any client population, we as professionals, I believe we do have a responsibility to educate ourselves on the cultural differences, whether that's cultural differences because of, you know, the way somebody's been raised, cultural differences because of where they're from, or because of what they've done. I think, you know, it's our responsibility to get ourselves up to speed on that. And I think if we do that, then we can be more effective for our clients. You know?
That sounds amazing. And something I'm really reflecting on there is culture in that broader context as well. And that the cultures within organizations, and the military is an organization, isn't it? I don't see it that way for some reason, but it you know, culture within that, the messaging, what we're meant to do, how we're meant to behave, what we're meant to sacrifice, and then trying to reintegrate into a world that is much more woolly than that, shall we say, you know, is very frightening, I imagine. Very isolating. So we've talked a lot about trauma here, Shelley. So I'm wondering, what other difficulties might veterans struggle with as they're coming out and reintegrating back into the world? So there's something about isolation there and the trauma. Is there anything else that you often see?
Yeah, I think the leaving of the armed forces in of itself can lead to difficulties. So what you might find is that people have found ways to compartmentalize and manage various problems whilst they're within the structure of the armed forces, because it's quite containing and it's quite predictable. Whereas when people leave, often logistically, that's a whole bunch of stuff, you know. So like we lived in a military house. So we lived in a military house on a military street. All our friends and neighbours were all military people. All our hobbies, our gym was on the base, like everything, our entire life pretty much revolved around this little military bubble. And so when you leave, it's like finding somewhere to live, finding somewhere to work, rebuilding a community, because it's a very close-knit community. Even if you don't know people for very long, there's often people have the ability to form strong relationships very fast. So people have to go through this whole life adjustment. And often with that comes a sense of loss. For some people, a sense of grief. They may not have left the forces of their own volition. They may have left because they have mental health problems or they've been physically injured. They may have left. Even in my leaving, really, I was quite torn, even though I knew deep down that I wanted to leave. I was ready to leave. I don't regret it for 1 minute, but I still felt a huge sense of kind of leaving something really important behind. I think people often experience a loss of identity. You know, like, who am I now? I'm not this person with this persona and this uniform. There's a complete rebuilding of life for many people.
From the way you're speaking there, Shelley, I do not mean to compare these two things, but it's coming up for me quite strongly. I feel when things do that, I feel like I should say it, otherwise I'll kick myself later. But I've worked with a lot of people who've left religion and left a cult, for example, and everything is contained. Like, everyone's there. This is who you go to for this. This is where you get your food. This is where you get this. This is where you get that. This is how you behave. These are your morals. and then to have this kind of vast world in front of you, perhaps where things, and certainly things coming up here for me about the military where, you know, if I'm expected to behave a certain way, protect people, shoot at people, you know, and then I come into a world where actually that's not acceptable,
Yeah.
then I'm an alien almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm having to adapt and find my new gym and find where we get food and find my friends and find where we hang out. And
Find a blooming dentist.
yeah. Well, good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck with that one.
Yeah. But it's all this stuff, isn't it? It's like that's a massive undertaking, particularly if somebody has left because they have been retired on medical grounds or they've left because they've had a really tough time. And then on top of that, you now need to rebuild your entire life.
I had a friend who served, and when they had they were in there from a young age, a bit like your husband, slightly older than your husband, but relatively young, and they did all their qualification. They were really well educated and, you know, able, got all their qualifications in the army, and then when they came out of the army, employers don't accept those qualifications, they don't recognise them, and they were completely de-skilled or devalued, I should say, and couldn't work. I think he was an engineer or something like that. Ended up being a delivery driver instead, which is fine, but he wanted to be doing a lot more, and it was just that huge adjustment to what he had known to what he was now able to do that was really hard for him.
But Tom, can you imagine being in charge of looking after the stability of a £30 million jet and then the life of the pilot, and then coming into the world where you think, oh, maybe I could work for Boeing, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that, and then having to drive a truck, which is sometimes I wish I was driving a truck, right? I'd love that job, but although my wife would say you couldn't park it, and she is right. But yeah, I'm just putting myself in their shoes there. That's incredibly, like I say, I don't know if it's de-skilling. I don't know if I just feel like I wasn't contributing. I wasn't meeting my potential.
Yeah, it's a sense of identity again. Even being a therapist is very much my identity, rightly or wrongly, but it is. It is. And if I wasn't being a therapist, oh God, who am I? What am I doing? You know, I can only compare it to that really. But yeah, that loss of what you are able to do and who you once were, and then comparing it to what you now have to be. I can see, if the starker that is, I can imagine the suffering to be greater in that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I think I was really lucky because my particular role was like almost directly transferable to another organization. So I didn't have to think, oh, like, what's my career going to be? Or like, I knew I was a therapist in the military. I'm going to be a therapist out in the military.
You found a nice vein that kind of goes through lots of different, which is great.
Yeah, although I have to say, so when I left, then I ended up in this trauma service, and I was specifically working in the veteran thread of this service. And I very quickly realised that that wasn't really where I was meant to be and what I was meant to be doing. But it felt initially, it felt really safe and really comfortable. So basically, all I need to do is do what I was doing here, and I get to go home every day at the end of the day, and no one's going to ask me to like move to Scotland or deploy to, Afghanistan. But actually, in doing that, I kind of clipped my own wings a little bit. I kind of just, pigeonholed myself, and quickly realised that actually I was probably moving towards expanding into other areas and doing different things.
I was just thinking that, if this was me coming out, would that be the step I'd need? Because I would wonder if I was leaving that in that organization with those values, and I was then just joined, let's say I joined a IAP service as a CBT therapist, and I've got Jane Smith in front of me who's worrying about their son cycling to work every day. Would I have the same compassion? Do I need to almost bring myself down and recalibrate my compassion almost? And I wonder if doing that through a military one, then going into a more broader work might help me with that. But that's just my reflection.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think professionally I didn't particularly develop in that job. I was really comfortable and confident with what I was clinically delivering. Personally, I went through a huge, significant change when I was in that job. So as I said, the team had a very heavy focus on compassion-focused approaches, and I'd really poo-pooed that, if I'm completely honest. In the military, I was like, compassion? I don't have time for this rubbish.
Yeah.
Like, even on my CBT course, I gritted my teeth through those lectures, because I was like, I haven't got time for sitting here breathing. Like, I've got a massive to do this. You know, like, I was so in my own threat drive mode. I was so far in it, I couldn't even see it, you know? And then this service, every staff meeting we had, we'd sit and we'd do soothing rhythm breathing at the beginning of the meeting, and I'd be like going mad. I'd put my camera off and I'd be like pacing my room, and eventually I had to like sit up and listen to what my own nervous system was telling me, and subsequently did some additional training and began to kind of embody that into my own life. And very quickly, that's when I started to see how much I'd been influenced by my role in the military, and how I was just, you know, kind of careering through life at 1,000 miles an hour, and being forced to stop and acknowledge that led to huge personal growth for me.
So it was ultimately a positive thing, was it, to sort of challenge or check in or make peace with those other avenues?
Yeah, I think if I hadn't have been in that job, I would probably still be careering around at 1,000 miles an hour, you know, not really pausing to kind of acknowledge the stuff that I've kind of carried over from my career that's not really that useful for me anymore.
Yeah, I think that's the best possible conclusion you can come to. What's useful for me now? How much utility does that particular thing hold now for me? I think that's the best possible strategy for life, is that flexibility there.
Yeah.
Great. So, I suppose we've thought a little bit about what some of the issues might be. We've talked a little bit about working with the veterans in therapy. That's come up naturally as we've been chatting. But I wonder, Shelley, are there any key points that we haven't thought about here, that if we are lucky enough to get somebody in the therapy room, let's say they're one of those 50%, one of the 50% who've waited 4 years, and we finally get them in, is there anything that we can do as therapists to make sure that we are creating an environment for engagement?
Yeah. So I think engagement is key. So I think getting somebody's buy-in before moving into any kind of change-focused therapy is so important with this client population. And if that takes a bit longer, so be it. But I think getting them bought in is really important. And how we approach the client and communicate is really important. So I think as therapists, we use a lot of fluffy, floaty, indirect nonsense language. You know, we use 1,000 words when we could use 3.
Feeling very attacked here, Shelley.
Take it personally, guys.
Can we soften it a little bit?
So this is what we need to be like. We just need to be straight to the point with these people, and I think they really appreciate that. I think being really open and honest and saying, you know, I think you've come from a place where things are very clear and direct, and I wonder if that's a good way for us to communicate together. You know, I think that's really important.
Do you know, I would find that, not that I am particularly fluffy, but I'm probably, by someone like yourself standards, I'm probably incredibly fluffy, but I would find it really, I would find it really like, as if, I don't know, it was like I was telling someone off if I was probably as direct as like what your email was, your out of hours, or, you know, if I spoke like that, I'd be like, oh my God, they think I'm attacking them or something like that. It would take it, for me, it would take a bit of like reconditioning or probably unconditioning or something to be able to speak like that with people.
That's so interesting.
But that's something for me to think about.
But the key is being collaborative in it, though. So it's more about like how do we communicate based on your experiences. And sometimes I do think that we do things because it's comfortable for us as a therapist. So, for example, I teach on EMDR training, and in one of the areas, we teach people to adhere to a script. And many therapists dislike this intensely. It feels very uncomfortable. They want to add in their own stuff. And then in this one very small section, we're like, no, you really need to stick to the script. Because if you don't, the domino effect of that means other things will be less helpful. And I think sometimes we have to really notice, actually, like, is this uncomfortable because I don't like it? Rather than, is this uncomfortable because it's not helpful for the person in front of me,
Yeah, I get that. That's interesting.
This is kind of like all Glenn Waller's work, isn't it, on drift and therapeutic avoidance and therapist avoidance. This idea that I've got this, and I look, I can be like that. Sometimes I can rebel from the script we've got for this podcast episode, right? It's I can have this script in front of me and I think, no, I'm not going to do that. I can do this better than that. But it's actually realizing that I need to do what's right for the client rather than what my own schemas are telling me about myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's really interesting to think about opening up the communication about communication, because I definitely would be in that camp, especially in my earlier days as a therapist, of thinking, oh gosh, I'm not from the military. They think this and that about me. I need them to like me, and therefore I need to tiptoe around everything very gently. And I don't want to trigger you, and I don't want to do this. And so I could be very fluffy and woolly. So it's important to then think, okay, maybe that's not the right approach. And I know we have a lot of trainees who listen to this. Shout out to those who are, because I know it gets kind of distributed around some WhatsApp groups, and we appreciate that so much, guys, by the way. So this is probably really helpful for them.
Yeah. I think particularly for CBT therapists, there's so much strength in that as a model, because collaboration and curiosity is absolutely what you need, isn't it? So to have a difficult conversation with someone about, how best do I convey information to you? How best do I communicate with you? What language is helpful? Like, give me genuine feedback. That requires a collaborative stance. It requires the curiosity to say, I'm really curious, given you spent 24 years in this organization. How does it feel when I'm sort of gently probing around something and you're used to something that's probably quite different?
Just keeping a little eye on time. We're at our 57th minute.
Okay.
So,
shall we do our last bits and think about tidying up? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you, Tom, for being our timekeeper. That's one thing for season 2, guys. We are going to try and keep it to an hour. We probably will go over today because 57 minutes is tight, and I'm even taking up time now even by talking.
It's sort of a paradox. We're trapped.
Oh, just saying no. If we improve, give us feedback on our improvement. We like that. So what we're going to do is a quick fire round. Is that okay, Shelley? Because we thought, add in a different element. If you can't answer anything, please don't worry. We'll just move on to the next one, or maybe Tom or I will try and answer it with some of our ideas. But question 1, can you name one book or film that captures military trauma well?
I'm going to go for 2, right? Books. There's so much junk out there, but 2 really good books, because they're written by 2 really good blokes, is Battle Scars by Jason Fox.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really good book. And just gives a lot of insight into his particular difficulties and struggles. And another book by a guy called Nick Goldsmith called Rewild Your Mind.
I think I've heard of that one. Yeah.
Yeah, both really good books, but also genuinely really good blokes.
Jason Fox, is he the guy from the SAS show? Yeah. Thought so. Okay, great. Thank you. I thought you were going to say like Hurt Locker.
I love a good war film, I have to say. So yeah, me and my husband, we love watching a good action movie. But often they're not that accurate.
Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question. One myth about veterans. Can you give us a myth about veterans that might be debunked?
They're all the same.
Uh-huh.
That they're one kind of homogeneous population group. They're not. They're still all individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a therapist, you need to get in there and formulate that individual in the context of their military experience.
Fantastic.
Dropping any assumptions you may have about them in the process. Yeah.
Not forgetting that they're human first, right? Good. Can you name a common mistake that therapists will make with veterans?
Thinking that they're all the same. No. I think people make assumptions that veterans need to be seen in veteran-specific services. That's not the case for everybody. Like I was saying earlier, some people, I would include myself in this, would not be seen dead in a veteran-specific service. Don't identify with that stuff at all. So don't assume that's where they need to go. Don't assume it's where they need to be signposted to. And don't assume that they want something that echoes what they had in the armed forces. Lots of veterans seek therapy privately for this very reason.
Nice.
Thank you for that. That's great. And if you could give one message to a struggling veteran right now, what would you say to them?
What would I say? I would say that things it feels quite corny. I'm trying not to say anything that's like fluffy, corny kind
Yeah,
of.
you can't go back on that now.
Exactly. But I guess I'd want to be saying that things don't have to stay as they are, do they? Like, and I would orientate this in the science, because this science appeals to people who are quite straightforward. Like, neuroplasticity is a real thing. Like, we know that we can change how we think and feel about stuff that's happened. So that is absolutely possible.
Great. So nothing is fixed. Yeah. Let's see what happens. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very, very much. So, Shelley, we ask all of our guests to set Tom and I some homework to do in between now and our next. You're looking. Ooh, I'm scared now. In between now and our next recording, what we'll do is reflect on it in our perhaps intro or the check-in next time. Is there anything you have in mind that might help Tom or I develop, improve, experience anything?
So I guess it's helpful, I think, to map out like the different things that have an impact on someone who's served in the armed forces. So one of those things is conflict, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff we talked about today, didn't we? About identity, value, being kind of broken down and built back up. So I think it's helpful to like map all of that stuff out, and it helps us then have on a piece of paper a whole bunch of stuff that we might be then considering when we see these clients.
Okay. So for us to go and maybe reflect on that and to think about keeping that in our lockers.
Yeah.
When we meet that, maybe we can come up with a few of our ideas next time, Tom.
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
Inevitably, you'll think of things that I won't think about.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. My mind's just whirring thinking about that.
Let's not do it now. It's homework.
No, right. I know. I'm just saying.
Okay. So, thank you very, very much, Shelley. We're going to call our conversation there, if that's okay. So I just want to say a huge, huge thank you for coming. My mind has been opened. It really has, into working with veterans and how we can best support them. So, and thank you so much for bringing your own personal story and insight. It's been really, really valuable. And I hope it helps so many people out there as well.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really enjoyed having you, Shelley. I also feel like I've just got a lot to think. It's always been a blind spot for me. Haven't really worked with too many veterans, but I feel like it's opened me up a lot to, just awareness of things I didn't have before. Yeah. Thank you.
And if people are listening to this, Shelley, thinking, oh my gosh, this is my person. I need to speak to this person more. I need to read what they're writing. I need to pick up what they're putting down. Where can they find you?
Yeah. So Google me. Like, I am really easy to find because my name's really unusual. So that's one way to find me if you don't remember anything else. On my website, which is www.fortitudepsychologicaltherapy.co.uk, I've got a section called the Trauma Toolbox, which contains loads and loads of resources. There's loads of blogs on there. There's like a community that people can sign up to. I have like free resources on there. We've got like a trauma prep workbooks and stuff on there, and just loads of cool stuff. And then there's links on there to all my other work that I do, publications and whatnot. So yeah, if you want to look that up, that's my website, and then it's / the Trauma Toolbox.
Brilliant.
Great. And I'll definitely be looking at that. Thank you so
same.
much. And we'll be signposting people there as well. If there's resources there, that's amazing. We'll also put links to those in our show notes as well, if that's okay. So people will have access to it that way as well. Guys, thank you so much for listening. We're at 1:04. Sorry. We won't be recording next week. We're doing fortnightly as usual. We'll be coming back. We've got Ron Yap joining us next time. You might remember Ron, who joined us for, I was trying to say join. So Ron, who joined us, in one of our early episodes to think about loneliness. He's coming back. He's talking about something a little bit different, but we'll save that for next time. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening. Please do drop us a comment on Spotify, or if you can, a rating. That would be amazing. Please do follow us on Instagram. And if you have any ideas for upcoming topics or any questions for us to answer in our next episode, please do feel free to reach out. In the meantime, we wish you all the best. And Tom, would you like to say goodbye?
Yeah, thank you so much for listening, guys. And we'll be back in 2 weeks as promised.
Take care till then. Bye-bye.
Take care.